My guest today is Director of History of Christian Thought and Experience at Macquarie University and the Head of Christian Thought at the Department of the Australian College of Theology. Stuart Piggin's area of expertise is clearly history, and so he would have been interested in some of that history that's just gone a few moments ago. And he's written extensively this book, The Fountain of Public Prosperity, looking at evangelicals, evangelical Christians who've helped to shape our nation. Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you, Keith. It's very nice to be speaking to the head of a movement which dates its history back to John Wesley, great hero of mine. So thank you for having me.
And a hero of mine too. Tell me why you chose that title, because I'm interested by the title.
The Fountain of Public Prosperity?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I was going to call it Australia's Missing Story, because I came to write this book because I noticed that most secular historians had left out so much of the Christian story. And it just was repeatedly leaving out the Christian aspect of things. So I was going to call it Australia's Missing Story. But one of my colleagues said that's far too negative, the title. So I was reading a sermon written by one William Haygarth, who came to Australia in the 1850s, and he actually ministered in the outback. And he spoke about the impact of Christianity on the reform of the convict system and the assistance of people in the outback and so on. And he came up with this idea that Christianity is the fountain of public prosperity.
So, and it's got a good insight to it there, in that it's a positive contribution to society, isn't it? You know,
yes.
That title picks that up, doesn't it?
It is. It's marvellous. And I think that this particular brand of Christians, the evangelical Christians, this is a vital Christian movement. This is not a nominal Christian movement. This is a movement of Christians who believe that they had to make a difference. And they had to make a difference, I think, in three areas. They had to make for greater justice and freedom in the community, so they contributed to the development of that in Australia, and Australia was one of the great nations where those things were developed. But also they were interested in morality and in civic righteousness, but also in compassion, which is the great Wesleyan influence, of course. But
and I think this evangelical coming to Australia, it works, doesn't it? Because we're a new nation, not the only nation, because there's been one here for thousands of years, but a new nation trying to find its purpose. Yes. It fits into that also well. I think that's
a very important insight that you've just made, because I think that in actual fact what happened was that the type of Christianity which was first launched onto the Australian scene was this form of Christianity, which arose from the evangelical revival with Wesley and people like this. And it had a big job to do, because you had to do something for convicts, you had to do something for Aboriginal people, you had to do something to take the gospel to the South Seas. So these were very challenging mission fields. And so you had to have a very strong form of Christianity to do it.
And justice, of course, was right on our doorstep, the need for it, wasn't it, with these people?
Well, with the convicts. You had this dramatic reform of the convict system. I think if you look at what evangelical Christians did, they thought that transportation was more merciful than hanging, and therefore they supported transportation. And then they supported the reformation of transportation, the reform of it, because they wanted to reform everything. They wanted to do it better. And then they supported the abolition of it. So they sort of understood the way that history works, and they just did what they could at the time.
And I think of Edward Eager every time he talked like that, because he was both those things. Somebody that shipped out from Liverpool to here, and then eventually becoming one of the great people fighting for abolition.
Well, you've got some great names. I was very interested in your historical introduction, and one of the great Methodists that came to mind when I was thinking of that was William Binnington Boyce, who was the one who made the Australian Methodist movement a separate part from Britain. The Methodist Church was the first church of all the denominations to break links with Britain and set up as an independent church. And William Binnington Boyce, he was an amazing guy. He was on the Senate of the University of Sydney, but he translated the Kaffir languages. He worked out how to do this when he was in Africa. He came up with an amazing way of translating languages. He did it very quickly. Very bright boy, and very compassionate, and very able to organise the Methodists to become a great force. So that in the second half of the 19th century, Methodism was the branch of Christianity which was setting the pace for all the others.
The question I want to ask you before we finish is this, really. You're involved in church history, and history in general is important to you. I don't think it's high on the list of many younger people's thinking today, and I think it ought to be. How do we fire people up to understand where we've come from? Because Because I think it's important, isn't it, to understand who we are?
It's not only important, it's absolutely essential. I don't think if you understand the past, you can possibly understand the present, let alone have any hope for the future. I mean, when you think of, I've just been thinking of the relationship between this and science, with dementia, for example, with people who don't have any memory, they can't have any vision for the future. And so this is a really serious matter. I mean, history is the way of understanding reality. And if you don't have an historical perspective, you don't really know what reality is. You've got no idea. You're living in fantasy land.
Stuart, it's a delight to talk to you. I'm going to ask that you come on again. I'm going to ask our guys to get you again. Double the fee next time, you know. When you come, or maybe half the fee, who knows. Come and talk to us further, because I think this is such an important area of our work. And I wish you well with this book. And I hope people will get onto our website, find the link and purchase the book for themselves. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.